Keep mumbling, it's okay. Welcome everybody to the dais at Toronto Metropolitan University and to the TMU Democracy Forum. I'd like to introduce, my name is Kareem Bardisi, I'm the Executive Director of the dais, and very pleased to introduce the Provost and Vice President Academic of Toronto Metropolitan University, Roberta Iannacinto Provenzano. Welcome, Roberta.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kareem. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you to our Democracy Forum. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the history of the land that we're on. The acknowledgement is a place to begin our thinking about truth and reconciliation, and I encourage everyone to consider their relationship to the land and Indigenous peoples. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. As we gather today to let us continue to carry forward our commitment to honoring reconciliation, decolonization, and Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing in all our endeavors. Thank you all for being here. As many of you know, the Democracy Forum is a nonpartisan platform for politicians and practitioners to engage in dialogue and increase democratic engagement. We've had the pleasure of hosting leaders and MPPs from across the NDP, Liberal, Progressive, Conservative, and Green parties to discuss policy and politics. As an institution, TMU believes in fostering dialogue and debate as our teaching, learning, and research are driven by the diversity of ideas and experiences of our community. Today's event is led by Martin Regg Cohn, a political columnist at the Toronto Star, covering Queen's Park. Founder of the Democracy Forum at TMU, Martin is a senior fellow at the dais at TMU and a senior fellow at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at U of T. He was also a foreign correspondent for 11 years in Asia and the Middle East, and was also a parliamentary correspondent. I look forward to this afternoon's discussion, and over to you, Martin.
Thank you. Bienvenue, bonjour. Welcome to our 37th Democracy Forum at Toronto Metropolitan University, where we try to do democracy differently and democratically. You know, our very first Democracy Forum was just before the 2018 election. They're all rolling together now. And we had all four major party leaders on stage together here on campus talking about democratic engagement. Now, we invited everybody back, all the party leaders. We did ask the Progressive Conservative leader, Doug Ford, who's trying to be reelected as Premier, to also join us, and he has taken a rain check. It's the middle of an election campaign, and he doesn't want to do it during an election. However, the good news is that all the other opposition leaders, party leaders, there's no opposition and Premier in the middle of an election. So all the other party leaders, major party leaders, have agreed to come. So we will have tomorrow the NDP leader, Marit Stiles. Next week, we'll have a Green Party leader, Mike Schreiner. And today, we're kicking it off with the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, Bonnie Crombie. So let me tell you a little bit about our guests. It's a democracy forum, not quite a political rally, but that's okay, Howard. Bonnie Crombie has been Liberal Party leader since 2023 and is also running as the party's candidate in Mississauga East Cooksville. She was mayor of Mississauga for 10 years and a city councillor before that. In addition to provincial and municipal politics, she won a seat federally and was the member of parliament for Mississauga Streetsville. I always make sure to get my Mississaugas right. In her previous life, she was a public affairs consultant and a business executive. She holds an MBA from the Schulich School of Business and a BA in political science and international studies from U of T. Now, this is not her first time at the Democracy Forum. She was one of the candidates at the debate we had during the Liberal leadership race in 2023, which she won a few weeks later. Not the debate, but the candidate's vote. So welcome back to the Democracy Forum at Toronto Metropolitan University. I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping first, as I always do. A reminder to everyone in the audience that when you registered, and again when you checked in, you agreed to abide by our code of conduct, which means you get to ask questions, but you got to listen to the answers as well. There's no live microphones today except for us. We're using the Slido app. We love Slido. It's very democratic. We have the QR codes up front. Just use your phone to register, and we will turn to your questions later on. So start thinking now about what you want to ask. I'll kick it off first. I always remind people this is not a news conference. It's a democracy forum, so it's not a confrontation. We try to dig a little deeper and wait for more in-depth answers from our guests, especially during an election when people really are looking for answers. So let's get into it.
Hey.
Welcome.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for having me back.
Let's start. We don't usually do this because we're supposed to be a serious democracy forum, but this is a serious question.
Okay.
Let's start with the news of the day, or at least yesterday. We're talking about Doug Ford's slip-up, where he reminded us of his love-hate relationship with Donald Trump. In case anyone in the audience hasn't heard, he was caught on an open mic saying that he was 100% for Trump, this time as he was in previous elections. And here's the full quote. On election day, was I happy this guy won? 100% I was. Then the guy pulled out the knife and fucking yanked it in me, unquote. And pardon my language, or more precisely, pardon the Premier's language. A reminder to our guest, you have a live mic on. It's a hot mic, so watch your language. But seriously, what does this tell us about the candidate who is running to be Premier and his relationship with Donald Trump, or his views on Donald Trump?
Like the hot mic, I'm a hot senior. I think it's very revealing about the Premier. I mean, it's one thing for him to have shared ideology with the incoming president when he was first elected. Maybe we didn't know him very well then, although I think we did, but they were aligned. But knowing the President of the United States was going to wager a trade war with us and engage in very punitive tariffs, we have to wonder why that would be beneficial to Doug Ford and why he would stand with a president whose intent was to hurt and to punish us in a trade war, one that was going to cripple our economy if he went through with it. So how would that have been of benefit to Doug Ford to side with him? So my cynical mind thinks that somehow this whole election has been a manipulation, knowing a tariff war was coming and how he could use that to his benefit. But I think it's very revealing about the personality that he would still stand up and side with Donald Trump, knowing the kind of behavior he was about to engage in.
So you're saying he almost was leveraging, he wanted Trump to win so he could use him as a pretext for an election?
That's what it looks like, Martin, that he would use the trade war and the tariff war to his benefit, because I can't think of any other reason why we would go to an election right now. He has a majority government and a year and 16 months, actually, until the next election call. He can govern to cling to power when we're in a crisis, and we really need all hands on deck. You know, we need everyone functioning at full cylinders. I would be at my desk working the phones and working my relationships, not calling an election. I mean, I can't imagine another premier in any other province calling an election at this time when we all need, to row with
Okay, let's
together and create a united response. a federally united response.
Let's not talk
We're
about
all
the top.
rowing on one team. That's where I'm going with that.
Let's not talk about the clock on Trump, but let's just revisit that for a second, because it really was an interesting revelation. As you say, in 2018 and in 2016,
2016,
Trump
they overlapped for 2 years.
Was
yes.
it was a different view of Trump.
Correct.
But right now, we have a candidate who was an election denier in the US, an election denier and a January 6th denier. So what does it tell us about Mr. Ford's judgment that he would have been 100% for that?
You know, and this is the president who let us know that he was standing with tariffs, that he would be issuing a tariff war. He would be very punitive. He stood on the tariff platform, and that's what was coming. It wasn't a surprise after he was elected. He let us all know that he was going to issue a trade war. So what does it say about a man who is a leader in this province who would stand with the president knowing that he was going to be hurtful to our economy? It seems to me that he would use it. He was looking to use it to his own personal benefit.
Okay, quick follow-up. Is this the kind of, how serious, is this a one-day wonder? Is this the kind of break that you need to break out of the campaign?
I don't think it's a one-day wonder. There are always these moments in a campaign that are kind of pivot points, turning points, that are revealing about a person's character when you say, kind of those aha moments. Wait, you know, I was cynical about you before, but you know, maybe there weren't a lot of alternatives. I wasn't looking seriously at the alternatives before, but maybe now I should be. You know, it's one of those. Plus the early election call. I think I have to share with you that we were at the doors every day talking to voters, because that's what you have to do in an election campaign.
Not go to Washington?
No, you don't go to Washington when you're a candidate in an election. You go to Washington when you're premier and building relationships, but not when you're a candidate in an election. No, that's an abuse of power and an abuse of the resources at your government resources at your disposal. That is something called the Caretaker Convention, and that's not to be breached, but we think it might be. But I just wanted to make that point quickly. I apologize, Martin. At the doors, people are really angry. You know, there's this visceral reaction. You know, why are we having an election? And I'll say, well, speak to your premier. He called an unnecessary election when he has a majority government at a cost of $189 million. And for me, that's a lot of money. That's money that should have been put into our healthcare system because, of course, the core of my platform, our platform, will be fighting on family doctors and investment into our healthcare system, because that's what's broken. Our education system as well, but primarily it'll be to ensure that all the 2.5 million people in Ontario who don't have a family doctor have one today. Can I just take a little survey? Is there anyone in this room that does not have a family doctor that they're registered to? Just please, just show us. I see a couple hands. Not too many. I would have thought I saw more. And do you use a walk-in clinic, I guess? Or you go to the emergency department if you have an issue, but there's no one for your annual physical to follow your results, etc. So this is what I think people are truly concerned about.
We'll circle back to the policy questions, but I want to, in a moment, especially healthcare, but I've given you some pretty easy questions so far, like just icebreakers to warm you up.
That was easy?
Here's the tougher trick question, I guess. And we asked it 3.5 years ago when we also had the opposition leaders on the Democracy Forum. And they gave their answers, but they didn't really hold up. And the question is, who can defeat Doug Ford? Because he's very high in the polls. So who can do that job?
So let me give the explanation and then the answer. I mean, I do see movement. I see shifting. I feel some momentum, especially at the doors. People can't bottle up that anger for long. There has to be an outlet. So whether it will be released in our favor or one of the other opposition leader favors, people are angry. They know they were being manipulated with this election call. I mean, I think they understand that the premier is really not in it for them. He's in it for himself, his rich friends and insiders. I mean, why would he call the election?
Even if we understand that, I apologize for interrupting, because I've heard this before, though.
Yeah.
Even if we understand that there was some unhappiness with Doug Ford, why is no one else able to defeat him? That was really the question after the last election.
So the last election, well, I hope there are other alternatives this time that people might look at seriously, who bring a different set of credentials and experience, as I think I do, having run a government in Mississauga, I think quite ably. I know there are people in Mississauga that think Hazel is still mayor, but believe me, I was there for 3 elections, 9 years, yeah. So I bring that kind of level of experience that maybe the other candidates in the last election didn't bring to the table. And I think I bring a lot of confidence. I mean, I got elected with 78% of the vote in Mississauga, and I'm hoping to bring that skill set to the province.
But the challenge is that you're right.
It is a
I
challenge.
was waiting for you to raise the 78%. It's true. You had 77.8%, I think it was, the correct decimal, in your last election. But now you're at about 22 or 23% in the polls.
Depends which poll you look at, but okay.
In that neighborhood, and he's at roughly twice that. And I don't like the horse race, or horse racism, as I call it, in media today, but it's impossible to ignore that. If people are hungry for change and no one's tracking, no one's getting traction, that's on the opposition. So why so low?
I think some of the answers to that are people weren't engaged. People are busy, they're struggling, they're trying to put food on the table and pay their rent and their cell phone bill all the same month. I think the Progressive Conservatives and the Ontario government have been running hundreds of millions of dollars worth of ads, both pro-Ontario, Isn't Life Great ads, and also anti-Bonnie Crombie ads. It's interesting the amount of attention I received.
Let me ask you about that. So one of the interesting things about this election and the pre-campaign part is that Doug Ford seems to be a bit obsessed about you. He has been targeting you specifically, taking a lot of shots at you. What's more interesting is that more recently, at her campaign launch, the NDP leader, Mart Stiles, also took aim at you and said you were kind of like Doug Ford light.
Yeah.
So why is there so much, why are you a lightning rod for them?
It's an interesting question. They both, well, particularly the Premier, spends a lot of time thinking about me. I know he raises my name in responses that I'm not even mentioned in.
He's living rent-free in your head.
I'm living rent-free in his. He's not in mine in the same way. I'm thinking about how to defeat him. Why is that happening? I think because he knows I'm a legitimate threat, or they both wouldn't be attacking me. I bring a different kind of skill set than that they've seen before. You know, somebody who is a business person like he was. I ran a government, he's ran a government. We both also grew up in Etobicoke. There's a little bit of that. Yes, I ran Mississauga. I chose Mississauga to raise my kids, but I spent my teenage years in Etobicoke as well.
But aren't you worried that some of that negativity will stick? It happens in politics.
It does.
Michael Ignatieff?
It does, yes. And, you know, we weren't prepared to respond. We were raising money, building a team, et cetera. We are responding now. I bet some of you have seen our attack ads now. And people become engaged during an election campaign. I think a light bulb goes off and you start paying attention, particularly in about the 2 weeks before the election mark, when the advance polls are coming up. You start thinking about, okay, I'm going to vote. I'm going to cast a ballot. Let's recall who's running and what they stand for, what their policies are. So I think people are becoming engaged now, and they'll evaluate the leaders based on the level of experience they have, whether their values align with theirs, you know, what their platforms are, who is speaking to them directly. I mean, I will not, sorry to say, be talking about booze, bike lanes, big spas, or my rich buddies. I will be speaking about healthcare, affordability, education to some degree, and building homes. And tax cuts, let's not forget those. So.
We're going to turn to those in just a minute.
Yeah.
So one more trick question, quick trick question. Politicians are trained never to answer hypothetical questions. So let's call this a thought experiment. Suppose that what you said today so far is true and that you were able to narrow the gap with Doug Ford.
Yep.
And instead of a massive majority, the mother of all mandates, he actually is held to a minority government. And here's all this bad blood between you and the NDP. Could you work together, and would you work together? Would you commit to defeating Doug Ford if there was a minority? Because it's what your predecessors did 3.5 years ago. They said they would team up against Ford. But you say you're a little different than other Liberal leaders. You're not as NDP-ish. You're not as left-leaning.
No,
so could you team up?
Yeah. So the one thing I want to say is I think campaigns do matter, and we will be going into debates. At least I will. I assume the Premier will attend debates. And I think that people will listen, particularly if you're watching debates for the reason of making a decision on where to cast your ballot. Can we team up in a minority government? So as you well know, we don't plan to lose. We plan to turn this thing around and win. I think the gap is narrowing. I think we will see some shifting even later this week. I'm very hopeful of that because I can feel it. I feel it when I'm out and about. I feel it at the doors. I think there's some momentum building.
Perfect. You set it up for the answer then. So supposing it's a minority.
I can work with anyone. I have. Don't forget, I was one of the 3 mayors in the region of Peel, and we all had our own distinct interests as well that we had to predict, and we would work collaboratively.
So you would not keep Doug Ford in power if you held the balance of power?
Would not, no.
You would not?
No, I would not keep him in power. I think he's doing immense damage to this province and the people of this province, and I think he has to go. He has to be sent packing.
Okay.
I do.
So you've listed a few of the issues that are hot button items for people right now. Doug Ford says the election's about America and Donald Trump. So my question to you is, what is the election really about? And in particular, what do you think will be the ballot question, which is what political scientists talk about as the vote determining issue when people go into the ballot box, go into the ballot room and put their votes in. What is the ballot question that will be top of mind for voters?
So I think the referendum will be on Doug Ford and his performance as Premier, but he wants to make it about tariffs, even though the election's not about tariffs. We know he used that as an excuse to call an election. He said so basically himself yesterday in his hot mic moment. All the opposition leaders have also publicly stated that we would support any stimulus package. We would support any response, because this is a time of crisis. It's a time to come together, not to have conflict. So we would align with our pro-Ontario response that got fed into the federal government, because we need a United Team Canada approach. When dealing with a bully, you have to stand up and you have to be aggressive as well. So we have to show a very united front. And I think the last 48 hours have been very instructive. You know, when they said there would be 25% tariffs on Canada Tuesday morning, February 1st, what happened? We really saw a resurgence of patriotism. We were all sharing emails about which are the Canadian brands we wanted to support, you know, what were those Canadian products we should be more loyal to, you know, Canadian procurement only, buy Canadian, buy local. Women were dropping their American boyfriends, you know. It was, it was all about pro-Canada. And then, when there was some relief that the tariff threat had been pushed off for another month, and part of me thinks this is a greater negotiating ploy, and they'll come to some agreement in the interim as we keep negotiating. You know, the Premier was very quick to put the alcohol back into the LCBO, the American-produced alcohol, and back into the LCBO. You know, so what was that, just virtue signaling? If we're going to keep the alcohol out, keep it out until there's a deal. Let's take a principled stand here. You know, until we have a deal, we don't know for sure.
So he should have kept the bourbon and the American booze out of the...
Hey, what an opportunity to buy Canadian, right? We all talked about buy Canadian 48 hours ago. Let's actually do it. Let's enjoy Ontario wines, BC wines. Hey, there may be even some French and Chilean. But
so we'll come back to Trump then in a bit, because the Premier's talked about you and Trump. But the issues.
He's talked about me and Trump?
Well, he said that he said that he couldn't imagine you or Marit Stiles.
Why? Is that because we're
against
girls?
the table. Sorry, again?
Nothing. I don't have confidence in his ability to negotiate with Donald Trump. I don't think we'll ever see him negotiating with Donald Trump. He's actually not a player in the negotiations.
Presidents and premiers
No,
negotiate.
Premiers and governors talk. Presidents and prime ministers negotiate.
So why did he say?
And his
You
team.
you said just now that because
It's a very demeaning comment. I think it was meant to be a slight. Let's put it that way. I think it was meant to be a slight and a slander. Yeah. It was demeaning. And he really would have a bit role in the negotiations in any case. His job is to fly the Ontario flag up the pole to the Prime Minister, and we were going to fly the Canadian flag together. That's our role.
Okay, so
and I would worry about his ability to negotiate. Look at the deals he's cut. Look what happened at Ontario Place. Do we all remember there? $2 billion given to a foreign company to build a spa? a spa at Ontario Place for $2 billion. That's a deal, right? Very punitive clauses to extricate yourself.
Let's talk about the issues that should be on the table. So what is your number one issue? You said Doug Ford is the referendum, the ballot question. What's the top issue? And I think you probably gave it away because your bus is painted with the colors on healthcare and finding a doctor. So what are the top 2 or 3 issues that you think we should be talking about instead of Trump?
So our plan involves 3 issues. I keep it simple. The top one is healthcare. I'm going to invest $3 billion to ensure that within 4 years, you have access to a family doctor. Now, I was delighted to see many of you didn't put up your hand that you did have a family doctor, not that you didn't. But that's not the case across the province. And we also know it takes a lot of stress on our hospital system. So I don't know if anyone's visited an emergency ward lately. Has anyone? How long was your wait? Tell me. How long did you wait?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, centuries.
Right. What about you, sir? How many hours did you wait in the emergency ward? You visited a hospital? No? Yeah? 12 hours. And this is because people don't have a family doctor. Because when you don't have a family doctor, you have no recourse but to go to a walk-in clinic or the emergency ward to get attention. So if we can ensure that everyone has access to a family doctor, then it'll take a lot of stress off our hospitals. So we need to invest in our hospital system, yes, and hire more nurses and doctors. But our plan for $3 billion will recruit 3,100 new family doctors. Some of them have left family medicine for other disciplines. We need to incentivize them to come back. Yesterday, we announced a patriotic pledge that we would incentivize those doctors who are Canadian and practicing across the border. Maybe they're in Detroit and they live in Windsor. Maybe they're practicing in Buffalo, but they're Canadian and live in Niagara Falls, or maybe they're in upstate New York or where else. Come on back. This is the time we need you, and we're going to give doctors and nurses a $150,000 incentive to come back home. But we're going to get more people, young people, through medical school. We're going to build new schools, but that's not a short-term solution. What is opening up our residency programs, doubling the number of people that go through the residency programs, and increasing the number of people who go through what's called, this is a little bit technical, Martin, you will know the PRO, Practice Ready Ontario program. So they're kind of being mentored by a practicing doctor. So they need to get their credentials up to speed. We got to get more of them through there. 3,100 new doctors back and forth. Take the burden, the administrative burden. Do you know that doctors spend as much time on paperwork as they do seeing patients? They don't want to do paperwork. That's why we have them work in teams and streamline the admin work for them. So that's what we want. We want to bring more doctors into the system, incentivize them, pay them properly, incentivize them to go to some of the remote and rural areas, and incentivize Francophone doctors as well, so our Franco-Ontarians can get access in their own language. So that's healthcare.
Let's just jump in there.
Okay, because
so that's a lot. So that's a lot of fixes.
That's a lot of fixes.
Fixing a broken system.
Correct.
The NDP made healthcare their big issue in the last couple of elections.
Not this
and
one.
their pitch was that the previous Liberal government had let the healthcare system atrophy. So hallway medicine was a phrase that was used in the 2018 election against the Liberal government of Kathleen Wynne. And the Progressive Conservative government, just before the election, announced that Jane Philpott was on the team and had their own plan for fixing the healthcare system and the doctor shortage. And you and her had been talking about her running as a Liberal candidate, and the Tories brought her on their side, in the public service, I should say.
Yep.
So the question is, how do you run on healthcare as the fixer when the NDP will argue that you broke it?
Well, they're not running on healthcare. I am. I have a plan that will fix the system. I'm going to invest a lot of money. And let me say, they turned to a Liberal to fix healthcare. Just saying, with Jane Philpott. And you know, it wasn't as bad as you're presenting, because certainly 2 million more people had access to a family doctor when Dalton McGuinty was the premier. There were never ER closures. There were 1,200 last year, ER closures. And the Liberals did build 23 hospitals. So that is the record. I'm not running on that record. I have a team of experts surrounding me People like, well, Dr. Adil Shamji, who you well know, who's our healthcare clinic. People like Lee Fairclough, who used to run St. Mary's Hospital in Kitchener. People like Dr. Rose Zacharias, who's a former president of the OMA. She's running to be one of our candidates, and these are the people who have put input into the system on how to fix it. Quite frankly, we've all read Jane Philpott's book. I know the template. I know that we want to get you a family doctor, get you into team medicine based on your postal code. That works. I've got a $3 billion plan that will do that. It's funny, because that $3 billion price tag is the same as the $200 checks you were just given, the pre-election checks that you were just issued. And those checks, nice to have a check, right? Sure, why not? Helps you with your groceries, pay your rent this month. What about next month? You brought yours.
I just got my checks. I was going to use them as a prop for something else, but
I thought you were going to donate them to the Liberal Party, actually.
There is a tax credit for that, but I know my daughters are not about to do that. But I've got three. One of the daughter has already opened them. But yeah, they're all in the mail. I wonder why we're having an election right now. But just in fairness, I don't want to play fact checker.
And that's where I was going to go.
Let me just fact check.
Okay.
So there's a lot of doctors being thrown around, but Dr. Eric Hoskins was the health minister when there were shortages of doctors, and there were ER problems in 2018. But let's talk about housing for a minute. Doug Ford promised to get it done in the last election. He set a goal of 1.5 million homes in a decade. A bit of a stretch goal because we're not really on track for that. Question is, how do you fix our housing problem?
That's a great question. And now that you've mentioned, he said he'd get it done, and he didn't. He said he'd end hallway health care. He didn't get it done. He said he'd cut our taxes. He didn't get it done. He said he'd build the 1.5 million homes. He ain't getting it done, but we will. And we do have a plan again, and I'm going to leverage all the experience I had in planning and zoning as a former mayor. And I had my ear to the ground with our residents, and I know what they were in favor of and what they opposed, and I know the challenges. I know that mayors were relying on development charges as a source of revenue and of income. And that system is broken, because that adds from $100,000 to $170,000 to the price of a home. And you have to pay those hidden taxes when you close. So if I could eliminate those, I could make the price of a home $170,000 cheaper. I would take the cost off the developer. The problem was, and being a former mayor, how do I make the city whole? Because we knew that they relied on that revenue. So we have a plan that creates a fund. It used to be the Building Ontario Fund. It's going to be the Better Communities Fund. That money will to be reimbursed the cities to pay for their growth that they otherwise would have gotten from the development charges, right? So that's number one. I know what works, and we have a plan to really improve the density intensification, provide more choice of home that is being built. Because with this government, the building that was done, largely tall and sprawl, right? We know that McMansions are being built and tall, shiny buildings. We need choice. Young people need choice. Seniors who want to downsize need choice. My mom's 88. She's not going to live in a townhome because there are stairs. She's afraid of elevators, so she doesn't want a high rise. So we need a smaller home for her. But that's the key, giving choice to families, to seniors, to newcomers, et cetera. But the housing has to be affordable. So yes, we're going to remove the development charges, which are those hidden fees at the end. Make the cities whole, and that just plays into, yes, we are going to negotiate a new deal, because I was the chair of the Big City Mayors of Ontario, and so I know their issues, and one of them is a new deal. They're asking for one, and you can ask me what that will look like another time, because we'll have to discuss that.
Can I jump in on the Big City Mayors for a second, and let me just connect some dots. So the other day in Scarborough, you gave a transit announcement in which you talked about increased security for transit. One of the reasons being there are a lot of people who are unhoused, who are on streetcars and in subways. And so you're investing a couple of, well, you didn't put a price tag on it, but it would be a couple of $1 billion all in for putting doors into the subway station, platforms, and so on. The question is, when you mentioned the big city mayors, a number of them and a number of smaller mayors signed a letter supporting Doug Ford overruling the courts on demolishing, dismantling housing encampments, and so on. So on the one hand, you're saying it's a problem to have folks who don't have houses on our subways and streetcars, which can discourage ridership. On the other hand, you're shaking your head about Doug Ford's move to override the courts on encampments. So where do you stand on that issue of the encampments that are all over Ontario now?
Thank you for asking me that. And, you know, I know many of you, being urbanites and living in Toronto, ride the subway. I hope you do. I do when I'm in Toronto. But sometimes you just don't feel safe, all right, particularly late at night. Sometimes there's problematic people, and maybe they're homeless, or maybe they're just problematic people. Maybe they're having an episode, whatever it might be. So we have a plan to make that safe. And the cost, let's start smaller in the busiest stations like Kennedy, like Bloor and Yonge, you know, phase it out over time so the people, and have more security on, 300 new commissioners on to provide increased visible security, cameras and more equipment, et cetera. But the issue of homelessness, mental health and addictions is acute. We have some of the highest suicide rates, and you would know that here at TMU because it's our students that have those high suicide rates. You know, it's one thing where not the majority of the mayors, some of them, certainly it wasn't a majority, it was some of the more conservative-leaning mayors, wanted their solution to end encampments, fix it, was to move it, to get rid of it. Now that's not a solution because those people do have to be housed. They have to be put in supportive housing and given the wraparound services. And they can't just be taken away. Where are you going to put them? Will you jail them? Where will you put them? You have to put them in supportive housing. There was no plan. There was no plan where to put the people in the encampments. I agree they're blight, but these are our people we know. And frankly, a friend of mine has lost his nephew who was out on the streets. He's one of those people. I'm going to share with you something very personal, and that is that my biological dad, one of the reasons my mom left him, when I was very young, Martin, I was 3, he had some serious mental health and alcohol addiction issues, and he ended up on the streets. I lost touch with him for 40 years until one day a counselor from the Seton House called me and told me my dad was living there and that I should come see him because he was end of life. And I thank goodness that we have places like the Seton House that can provide care and treatment for men who are otherwise would be on the streets. This is a very serious issue. I feel it acutely. I've experienced addiction in my family, and my biological dad's not the only one. These are our children. These are our parents sometimes, our nieces and nephews. These are people. And we need a plan and a strategy for that, for them. Not just to move these encampments. Where will we put them? Will they get the treatment that they need? The services that they need? Of course, it's a blight to see encampments in tent city. This is Doug Ford's Ontario. I don't remember encampments 10 years ago, or 9 years ago, or 8 years ago. I remember now, under Doug Ford's Ontario, seeing the tent cities arise. And yes, these are people that we need to help, and we need to build more supportive housing as a result. We have a plan to build affordable housing, to build more housing, to jumpstart the industry, because the development community really likes this idea that we could make building cheaper, the price cheaper, because there's the cost of building, then there's the price, and the market pressure will keep the price down. The cities like it because we're making them whole. We're also going to remove the land transfer tax on the provincial portion. That'll save you about $13,000 for seniors, first-time home buyers, and not-for-profits. And we got to fix the landlord-tenant board too. We do our bit for our tenants under the rent evictions, and you know the landlords have an issue as well. We got to fix them. Get 53,000 cases through the landlord-tenant board. So there's lots of work to do. But I don't stand with the notwithstanding clause. You can't.
Okay.
You can't do that to people, and that's a disrespect of their civil rights, their human rights. My goodness.
I'm glad you raised the landlord and tenant board because I've written a lot about that, and it really is broken. Okay, just a reminder to folks here to use the QR codes. I'm gonna log in a moment. If you see me looking at my phone, I'm not distracted. I'm actually just looking at your questions. So we'll turn to that in a minute. You triggered me when you said You got to keep the municipalities whole. It reminds me of another topic near and dear to those of us in this room, I think, which is post-secondary funding for colleges and universities, where the premier of the day, shortly after taking power in 2018, reduced the cash flow of universities by cutting tuition by 10%, which was a very popular and populist move.
Sure.
And then he's frozen tuition ever since. But he didn't make it up to the universities, other than to say, bring in more foreign students who pay much higher tuitions.
Yeah.
Now, it's not really a hot button issue, and I can guarantee you it will not be the vote determining issue. It will not be the ballot question in this election, but it might be in this room. So how would you be different? Because politicians almost never talk about colleges and universities, and I'm a little biased, I'll admit that.
Yeah.
So what would you do differently on that?
I believe in higher learning. I think many of you have undergraduate degrees, maybe some of you have post-secondary and beyond degrees. I think we need to prepare our youth, our kids, for the jobs of tomorrow, but we don't even know what they're going to look like. I had an engaging conversation with one of your folks here at TMU about AI and the impact that it's going to have on jobs in the future, and we're not even aware of that, but we got to train our kids up for the jobs of tomorrow. And I will say I think this premier has done a good job focusing on training skills, training for labor skills, but not for higher education. They haven't put the investment in. And I will share with you that in other provinces, they fund the operating costs of their colleges and universities just 60%. Here in Ontario, it's 30%. So hence the reliance, plus the funding is frozen, the tuition is frozen, hence the reliance on the foreign students. Now that's been cut back, so what will we do? Because we know that there are at least 11 of our 23 universities who are running deficits and are dipping into their reserves, starting to lay off staff and close departments. This is very serious for those of us who believe in higher learning and want our kids to get a good education. Not just skills-based training, there's nothing wrong with that, I believe in that too, but there are, for some people, it's not their path. So we have to fix it. And you know, I would like to see OSAP increased. I know increasing tuition is not popular, so we wouldn't do that. Maybe remove the HST, the PST off their loans, extend them more grants and loans, but work with the colleges and universities to get them the funding that they need so they're not relying on endowments and reserves and foreign students to pay their bills. Right?
Why wouldn't you raise tuition? It has been frozen since 2018, 2019. Bob Ray, a former premier who did a report for the Liberal government of Dalton McGuinty, is coming this Friday. We're going to ask him the same question. He recommended increasing tuition fees. Not very popular.
Well, our students are struggling now. You know, like I can see them nodding. You know, they're all sharing a 4 kids in a 500 square foot apartment. They're using food banks. We know that 1 million people in Toronto are using food banks. Many of them are young people. I don't know that they can afford a tuition increase. I think the solution is to fund our schools properly.
One last quick question before we go to questions from the floor. So you don't want to raise tuition, you don't want to increase taxes, you want to cut taxes.
Yes, we do.
You want to increase services. I'm not going to ask you how you do that. My question is, when did Liberals become
tax cutters?
Tax fighters?
You have to know me. I'm a different kind of Liberal. As you heard from my resume, I was a business person for many years, 20 years, before I even went into politics. I learned at the feet of Hazel McCallion, and she was a tax cutter. She was very thrifty. You know, we couldn't run a deficit as municipal leaders. The revenue you raised was all you could spend. You got to do the most for the money you had. And that's my orientation. I've never run a deficit. And I believe in that. But I'm very, very socially progressive. So there's this balance in me that takes me to the center. And so I'm a big centrist business person by training, having run a city that couldn't run a deficit. We are very strong financially. I was very good at bringing investment into the city, attracting investment into the great city of Mississauga, diversifying our economy, which I think is a failure for Doug Ford, not diversifying the economy of Ontario. It's not resilient. It's very, it can be impacted easily with a change in policies south of the border on, EVs and green energy policies, et cetera. So we're very vulnerable. He's left us in a very vulnerable space. So I'm a different kind of leader than you will have seen before. And I, having been a municipal politician, was always closest to the people. And I'm very approachable. So in the grocery stores, people will share with me their difficulties. I see moms putting meat back in the freezer. I see women cringing, and men too, when they're in the checkout lineup to pay, whether their credit card's going to go through one more time. And they talk to me. The first thing they say to me is, can you help me find a family doctor? Number one, we're struggling. How do we survive? I know taxes. People pay a lot of taxes. I think we can eliminate them. There is a lot of waste in the system, Martin. I can identify very easily $7 billion of waste right here off the top of my head that you will understand. $2 billion to bring beer and wine to corner stores 1 year early. They were coming anyways. The government watchdog, the FAO, showed us it was 1.9. $2 billion. $2 billion that we know that went to Ontario Place for ThermaSpa. It's $4 billion. $3 billion in pre-election checks. $7 billion off the top of my head. There's a lot of waste in the system. I think tax cuts will help spur businesses. A middle income tax cut for the first $75,000 of your earnings will reduce your tax rate by 22%. We'll take the HST off your home heating and hydro just to make life a little more affordable. And we'll cut the small business taxes from 3.2 to 1.6. That in addition to making housing more affordable to build and to purchase, we have a plan to do that, to make life more affordable. And that's my orientation. I always like to say tone at the top. Every leader sets the culture, sets the tone up top. Every CEO does that in their business operations. And as a mayor, I did that, and as a leader, I did that. I said, guys, we're right here. Ontario centrist. They want to help people, but we have to have our economy to thrive. Because until our economy grows and thrives, we can't distribute to help everyone else.
I want to thank you for setting up the next question, which
Perfect.
is going to come from... So the thing about Slido is you get to vote on the questions, and the most popular question, Jerry, is yours. Jerry Jang, I should warn you, is not just a student at TMU, but also a student journalist for the Eye Opener, so be careful. Do you want me to read the question, Jerry, or do you want to? Because you're right here, but I'll read it because this is the world we live in now. So Jerry Jang, most votes, it's a democracy, says, you plan to spend $3 billion, as we've just heard, to improve our healthcare system. How will you fund this initiative while cutting taxes and dealing with a $6.6 billion deficit?
Yes, I can't wait to see what the books really look at. But we know there's a lot of surplus in the system. I also know that they plan on the next budget to show that they're running a surplus, not a deficit. That's how it works. We know that the transfer payments from the federal government go into general revenue are not actually sent to where they were needed, where they were designed to go, to our education, to our healthcare, to our green policies. They just don't go where they're supposed to. And we know that there's waste in the system. I just outlined $7 billion. Our healthcare plan is only $3 billion. That could have been paid for without issuing the $200 checks to everyone. So that's how we'll
you
leave
keep
it.
talking about $7 billion, so you're triggering me again.
Uh-oh.
Because there's a $7
I don't know if I like triggering you or not like triggering you.
So on the books, there's also a $7 billion entry for subsidies, for recurring annual subsidies for hydro. So our taxpayers are cross-subsidizing our ratepayers to keep hydro rates artificially low because the Liberal government did that in 2018 under pressure from the opposition. Would you keep that going forever, the $7 billion subsidy?
Well, you know what? Maybe not forever, but now's not the time to remove it. People are struggling. People are struggling. They're not paying their rent. They're working multiple jobs. They can barely put food on the table. We outlined all this. The kids, I have 3 kids, and the families in this room will understand what I'm just about to say. 2 of my 3 got married this summer. 2 weddings, 1 summer, 2. But now, Mom, we want to start a family. We want to buy a home. Help, help. We heard those, and we're like, You gotta make life more affordable, Mom. Make housing more affordable. We all want to have a home.
I do have a plan for you for that marriage problem. My wife and I eloped, so it was a very low-cost wedding. So.
They're already married.
All right.
It was on their dime. I contributed what I could, but
So
I'm a humble civil servant, so.
You should know your audience in a democracy, and so the second most popular question, until a moment ago, it keeps changing, is from Gregory Burkle. What commitments, if any, are the Ontario Liberals making to ease financial burdens on post-secondary students? A different way of attacking the problem, the financial burden. You talked a little bit about OSAP and so on, but how do you fix that?
Yeah. So I would start with ensuring that our schools, universities, our colleges and universities are properly funded. We have to get up to par with the other provinces when the operating funding is 60% elsewhere and only 30% here. We're just not training our kids, and that's what I worry about. We're not focused on the right things, but we do have to make it more affordable. So when Martin said, would you unfreeze tuition? I can't do that right now. They can't. The young people can't afford it. They're struggling. We have to make it more affordable for them to go to school. So how do we increase OSAP loans? How do we take the interest rate off their loans and grants in the future? How do we extend the time for repayment of those loans? Everything to make it more affordable. I want you to go to school. I want you to learn. I want you to be here. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that you can attend.
Okay, Slido is actually very exciting because it's like a horse race to see which is the most popular question. And by far, the most popular, paradoxically, from Anonymous is...
Anonymous.
The 2022 provincial election had the lowest voter turnout. Why should Ontarians get out to vote in this election? And I'm going to just add my own because it was also on my list, so it's actually 21 people voting for this question. One of the ways Doug Ford wants to win this election is by holding it in the middle of winter to suppress the turnout. So the turnout was 44% in the 2022 election, but it was actually 57% in 2018, thanks to our Democracy Forum debate. But it was a change election.
Yes.
Maybe people don't feel this is a change election.
Well, I hope that they do feel it's a change election. I know more people come out to vote a government out of office. I think we'll see some nods. That is very, very true. And I'm seeing visceral reactions at the door. That's such a great gauge of popular support, what people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Bonnie Crombie, I'm running in this election. Doug Ford is called an unnecessary. Yeah, why are we in an election campaign in the middle of the winter? And of course, designed so that you wouldn't go out to vote. It's a way of voter suppression to have an election in the dead of winter when it's very tough to go out and canvass. Try putting election signs in lawns in a frozen ground. That's not easy.
But it's also an indictment of the opposition, isn't it? If there's a low turnout, it means that people aren't interested.
People stayed home. Maybe they didn't think there was a choice. I think it was also 2022 was a COVID election, so maybe a bit of an anomaly, people not used to going out still or not as engaged. I think there was, circumstances were different in 2022. It was still COVID. And I know the leader of the Liberal Party at the time didn't have a lot of name recognition. People didn't know who he was, largely because we couldn't go out and campaign in the same way, right? They didn't have the resources, and largely COVID related, I think. When you can't go out and knock on doors, people don't want to answer their door, people staying at home, doing meetings over Zoom calls, it's very tough. Or we're meeting one-on-one and we're both masked. It's really hard to make that connection with people. So I blame a little bit of that, a lack of engagement, and people stayed home on COVID, and the leader of the Liberal Party not having enough name recognition on COVID. But Martin's quite right. People vote when they're galvanized, when they're motivated, and when it's a change. They will vote you out of power for sure, as we saw in 2018.
Here's an interesting question. You said that you oppose the federal carbon tax.
Yes.
What is the Ontario Liberals' climate plan?
Yeah.
I'm going to cheat again before you answer and just say, what's interesting is that you did distance yourself from the Liberal carbon levy.
I did.
Early.
I did.
Now everyone else has done the same thing. So I'm not
glad to be a trailblazer.
I wasn't trying to set that up quite like that, but it's fair to say that you were ahead of the puck on that one.
Yes.
And some people questioned what you're doing. So all that praise, implied praise, or recognition of your political antenna aside, what is your plan?
Yeah, I will say that it is a difficult time, and people. I have said this repeatedly, but people are really struggling, and the thought of adding another tax was troublesome for me. I also want to share with you that I do feel very strongly that we have a carbon tax here in Ontario because of Doug Ford. Do you know why? He removed cap and trade. So automatically, the carbon tax was imposed on any province who didn't have a climate change plan, right? So I said I wouldn't impose a carbon tax on people, not on consumers, not on farmers, not on family. Did I want to differentiate? Okay, there was a little bit of that, but I truly believed.
He didn't want to fall into the trap he was laying for you on the carbon tax.
But, I've never, he labeled me on carbon tax. I've never voted for, I was a mayor. I was worried about roads, bridges, and sewers, municipal infrastructure. I didn't want to add an additional tax at this time. And knowing that we had the carbon tax because we didn't have a plan. So the solution was create a better plan that wouldn't tax people, that wouldn't tax consumers, families, farmers, et cetera. But we will have a climate action plan. As you well know, we have a panel of experts designing that plan. I'm not going to tease it out now, but there will be a climate action plan that will have green incentives. And it may resemble cap and trade, it may not, it may be something similar, but polluters will pay, but I didn't want to impose it on people, a consumer carbon tax.
You can tell us today if you want.
No, it's being finalized. You'll see it when the platform is revealed.
When will we see the platform? Will it be
Well, we
fully
still have
costed?
3 weeks, don't we?
Yep.
4 weeks, this is so fast. Yeah. So they're moving at lightning speed because we do have the panel of experts designing this. But well know that we're very concerned about greening the economy and moving to more sustainability and providing those rebates for green energy that you had seen previously. And a system closer to a cap and trade would be something along the lines of where we would go. This is near and dear to our hearts. But if you ask me what the election is about, the election I'm going to fight on, healthcare. And if you want to ask me a question about healthcare, there's a little bit of information I forgot to share. So hopefully there's a Slido question that takes me back to it.
There is.
Good.
Your wish has come true. But
Okay.
first, there's a question on something called the Green Belt, which you've heard. For me,
it's the scandal.
Anonymous says, for me, this election referendum is about the Green Belt. How would you handle the development in the Green Belt, and would you allow development?
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't allow development on the Green Belt. I mean, this was land that was put away in perpetuity to protect us. It was kind of our lungs, if you will.
Go ahead.
And what we saw was a government that became very arrogant and very entitled and thought they could do what they wanted. And one day announced that they would take 7,400 acres, I think, something along that, out of the Greenbelt, and claiming to make some swaps here and there and carve it up to their friends, their friendly developers, who some of which we think, because why else would they buy the land, maybe got a heads up, allegedly, that it would be rezoned from farmland and meadowland, protected land in perpetuity, to developable land, because we had a housing crisis. You know how scandalous that is? All the mayors, including myself, told the premier, we could accommodate the growth within our municipal boundaries. You don't need to go to the Greenbelt. And hey, you're not going to build anything there because there's no serviceable land there. There are no jobs there. There are no roads there. There are no public transit there. You're not going to put newcomers, because he said you have to accommodate newcomers, on land in the meadows in the Greenbelt, because there's not a road, there's not a police station, a fire station, a public school, transit, or jobs in that area. Not appropriate for newcomers. And you don't need to open that land. That land is there and it's protected for a reason. So some people, it appears, allegedly, I have to say that, were told that that land could be rezoned and went and purchased it from farmers. The value of farmland and meadowland, which we know is much cheaper. If you can't build on land, it's much cheaper. The price to purchase residential land, much, much higher, inflating that value to $8.3 billion. So this is one of the initial scandals of the Ford government. And we know that the RCMP are still investigating, and we're hearing they're getting closer to the truth. And I think, truly, I feel strongly that this is one of the reasons that this election was called so abruptly in the dead of winter.
So are you alleging corruption or are you alleging incompetence?
Oh boy, a combination of both. No, I would err on the side of misdeeds were done. I think that there were people who were given information inappropriately.
So riddle me this, just quickly, because we're almost out of time. Why? So he said he was sorry, and Ontarians.
Sorry, not sorry.
Ontarians forgave, and many of them forgot. Why? Because he's at 46% in the polls.
Yes. And they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising, both on me and those pro-Ontario feel-good campaign ads. And people do forget. It's very unfortunate, but he needs to be held accountable on his record, on what he's done to our healthcare system, because we know he's starving the healthcare system, deliberately underfunding our hospitals, our doctors, our nurses. We'll never forget Bill 124.
You asked for a healthcare question.
Okay.
We have one, although we are
so
almost
that we
out
could
of time.
justify private medicine. Remember that.
The question is, tell us more about your plan to get me a family doctor. I will warn you that you have about a minute until your staff wants you off.
I have to share this with you. I have two stories. I'll only share one. I see some people about my age in the room. So we haven't had a family physician in 2 years. These are letters I receive that help us shape our platform, okay, unsolicited. We're both in our 70s, and we access remote health care by a local walk-in clinic that you need to make an appointment for, usually 2-3 weeks out. This is not walk-in. Now this is a clinic. When you make an appointment online, no phone call, you are asked to donate $25 because of provincial cutbacks. My husband has heart disease and cannot access his cardiologist and always requires a referral and does not necessarily get to see his cardiologist, who knows his history. So there is no one to follow up on him and the efficacy of the meds he's been given. On another note, my sister died of breast cancer shortly after her 63rd birthday because she couldn't access health care. That's Doug Ford's Ontario. That's what happens when you cut health care. You don't fund our hospitals properly, and 2.5 million people don't have access to a family doctor. That's what happens.
I want to ask you one last question before we're out of time.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for students here today about how to get engaged and why they should get engaged in politics?
I got engaged a lot younger than the young people in this room. I was 15, 16 when the cute guy in class said, "What are you doing this weekend?" And I thought, maybe he's asking me out, I don't know. I said, "Nothing, why?" And he said, "Would you like to come drop flyers with me?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" His uncle was Polish. I'm Polish, by the way. I'm the most Scottish-sounding Polish woman you'll ever meet, just saying. And his uncle was Dr. Stanley Hajdasz, who was Minister of Multiculturalism. And I thought, a Polish person can get into government and be a cabinet minister. Then I learned about Pierre Trudeau and all the values he stood for. Nation building, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, etc. It was heady stuff, but it was so fascinating. And I got hooked early. But I was interacting with young people who shared my values, were engaged, wanted to shape policy, wanted to influence politicians. They wanted to be influencers of a different era. Not today, you'd put it up on some social media. Now you got the ear of a politician because you're canvassing with them. So you had like-minded people that you were socializing with. You were doing good because you were creating public discourse and you were engaged politically, and you could help shape ideas, use your energy to good use. So you meet great people who are, Howard Brown is sitting here. I met Howard those years, like I was all of 17, you must have been 18.
So this is a line you could use on Tinder now. Would you like to drop flyers with
Would
me
you
or
like
something
to,
like
what
that?
are you doing this
Okay.
weekend? Want to come drop flyers with me? I don't know if that would work today. It worked back then and I got hooked. So I've always been engaged in politics. People ask me when I entered politics, I didn't put my name on a ballot till I was 47, just like Hazel. Also, just like Hazel, we were both 47. We both have 2 sons and a daughter. There were a lot of similarities between her and I. And I left that wonderful city to take on the challenge of running the province. I thought I was the right person to bring the right skill set that could really feel the mood, the pulse of the people, and solve the problems. I wanted to get the basics right for people, because when you get the basics right, then we can grow and we could leverage it and see growth. But if you don't have the basics right, and you're worried about booze, bike lanes, spas and buddies, those aren't the right priorities for Ontarians. You know, healthcare, affordability, housing, education. Our education school is crumbling. Our education system is crumbling. Our healthcare system is crumbling. People can't afford life now anymore. There are encampments on our streets. Our suicide rate is some of the highest in the country here. It's time for change in government. I hope this to be a change election. I hope you will support me. Liberals, this is our tagline, if I may, we will do more for you. Not for the rich buddies, for you. Thank you.
On that note, please remember that Election Day is February 27th, which is just 23 days away. So don't forget to vote. A vote is a terrible thing to waste. I want to thank our guest, Liberal Leader Bonnie Crombie. Safe travels on the campaign trail. Thanks to everyone in the audience for being so democratic. And a reminder that we have NDP leader Marit Stiles here in the same chair tomorrow at noon, same place. Merci, Megwech. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know, thank you, Bonnie, and I know you and your team have to head out. We also have, I wanted to thank Brian from TMU Media, the TMU security team, and all the folks at the dais, all the daisies, led by Catherine Ambergi, who helped us put on this event, and Martin, to you for your leadership of the Democracy Forum. Thank you.